Good morning and welcome to Friday the 13th episode, number 44. What do you like my t-shirt today? Again, it took me a little longer than I wanted, but I'm back. I visited the Oredev conference last week. I did 2 talks. I talked about HTTP 2 and curl. Pretty much my regular talks. It was fun. A lot of people there. That's a really big conference. I never attended before. Over 1,000 attendees per day, and they have a 3-day conference, and there were also additional days on the side. So I was there on this security day before the actual conference, and then the first day in the conference, and then I went back home before it ended. But that was fun. I might go back. And yesterday it was Thursday, the 12th, and I attended an OWASP event here in Stockholm, Sweden, and I talked about HTTP 2 again. For this, OWASP is more security-related people, so it was like to a fairly security-aware, developer-centric audience. That was also fun, and we had beer, and that's always good. I did submit my TCP Tuning for HTTP internet draft to the IETF the other day, like a week ago or so, and I brought it to the HTTP working group in the IETF, and I've got some feedback and I've got some responses, and I have some communication going with a couple of people that have expressed their intents to bring me more feedback. And I have some other feedbacks that I haven't merged back into the document yet. So I'm working on a updated version of that draft. It'll be better and have more contents. So that moves forward. And interestingly enough, yesterday when I was talking about HTTP 2, and when I talk about HTTP 2, I usually go and explain that HTTP 2 doesn't change any headers. You still have the same headers as before, because HTTP 2 is just a framing layer change. So it'll be the same things from the server to the client and the client to the server, just kind of squeezed in the middle and delivered over the wire in a different way than before. That means that things like authentication headers and cookie headers remain the same. And cookies, of course, is a subject that are often mentioned as one of those ugly little things within HTTP or transferred over with HTTP that are fairly ugly, they're big, and they're usually, or they're often sort of used wrongly or in all sorts of different ways that they cause headaches and problems and pains and tears. Yes. And I mentioned that yesterday. We had some brief discussion about that. And then this morning, early morning, since he's Australian, Mark Nottingham posted a mail on the HTTP group mailing list in the ITF and brought up the discussion about revising the RFC 6265. The numbers are hard here. 6265. That's the cookie spec. So we're bringing the subject up now then. Should we fix it or should we revise the cookie protocol, how to do them? And I think it's a good idea. I think it's really hard. It's been tried many times before to actually change the cookies. It has never worked before. It has been attempted, I think, at least 3 times. I think there are 3 cookie specs written that were never adopted and never used. So maybe it could be a 4th. We'll see about that. I think we have a better chance this time because we have sort of a better community and we have some awareness of how these things work. So maybe if we go into this with open eyes, it might work better this time. I'm optimistic, but we'll see. I wanted to mention that we hit 20,000 commits in the curl project the other day. Woo! 20,000 commits in the source code repo. There's also a web repo with more commits. And I should say that the 20,000 commits doesn't really include all commits, because I only have commits from late 99. So the first few years I lost. Not that they weren't that terribly many, but I don't know. 20,000 commits and they're all on GitHub. And we saw this fun video someone made with the GORS tool, which generates a video based on the Git commits. Just each file, each commit gets a little flash, and each file gets created in a sort of funky tree and being visualized. So I'm quite fascinated. It's mesmerizing, I think, just watching 15 years of development as little dots flying around on the screen. You should watch it. Maybe you won't enjoy the full 9 minutes in the same way I did, because I couldn't sort of stop watching. But it's great fun, and it's an awesome tool. So you should try that tool out on your own Git repositories and just watch course videos all day. Yeah, well, it's a Friday, right? Talking about then celebration, or sort of 20,000 commits, even a nice number. There have been some more commits now, so it's not that nicely aligned anymore. But we also had 800 forks on GitHub, nice and round number. And the upcoming release will be release number 150. The 150th curl release since the beginning, since I've been counting them, which is another sort of big number, and I think it's sort of a reason to celebrate. I'm not sure exactly how. Maybe I'll have another cup of coffee on that fine day when I'll do the release. Anyway, I think because of that 150 number, I've sort of started working on... I have this minor problem. Just people ask me, what do you do in curl these days? Isn't it done? You know, how much can you do really? And then I say, well, we keep on doing things all the time. And you, if you're following me or following the project, you know that we have like 10 changes, we have 40, 50, 60 bug fixes every release, and those are every 8 weeks. So there is a lot of things happening. But we also have this problem, kind of similar to the browsers, that when doing a lot of releases very frequently, there is never any big bangs or whistles or fireworks when we do our releases. We just, here's another release, go on, take that, and we'll work on the next release. And we'll just do that, just throw them out every once in a while. Another release, another release, another release, another release. And we don't ever bang the drums and say, whoa, look at these new features, look at the cool stuff we've made since way back. And woohoo, look at this, the world. So, anyway, so I took a grander view on the project, and I looked at what have we actually managed to do, what have we introduced in curl the last 2 years. So at the time when we do release 150, I wanted to write something about what have we actually managed to do the last 2 years, and not just in the last release, because the last release is just another release with, you know, a couple of changes and a bunch of bug fixes. And actually, looking back, just the last 2 years, we have a lot of fun things that we have introduced in curl. So if people who aren't following our project very closely, if they possibly are using an older curl or just haven't paid attention at all, I just want to say that even though we're doing these gradual minor improvements all the time, it grows. So accumulated over time, they become a lot of changes. I'll detail everything in a long, boring blog post that nobody will read, but I will write it. And as you can see, there's not a lot of changes or actions this week, so I can talk a lot about nonsense instead. The command line option of the week I wanted to mention is the -X. I can't even speak. I mean the -6. IPv6 options. That is the option that you tell curl to use IPv6 only and not try any other IP version when connecting to a site. And in reality, that means that you're asking the name server for the IPv6 addresses only, the AAA, the quad A entries, which then means that in the regular curl connect mechanism, when you, for example, if you used for a website, an HTTP server, curl would resolve the host name and get both IPv4 and IPv6 addresses, or rather it would get a lot of them, or it would get a number of IPv4 addresses and a number of IPv6 addresses, and it would try to connect to both IPv4 and IPv6 at the same time in parallel, and then the one that connects first it'll use, and then it'll disconnect the other one and then go on. So it'll raise them against each other. That's the happy eyeballs algorithm. But if you select one specific version, it won't do any happy eyeballs at all, since then you only get one family of IP addresses. So you can also use the -4 address, the -4 option, the --IPv4, and then it'll just ask for those addresses, and then it'll just iterate through those addresses when it tries to connect. Those addresses, because you can potentially get a list of addresses when you resolve a hostname, and then it'll iterate through those if in case it fails on the first, and then it'll try the next and next and next and next until it times out or it runs out of addresses to try. That's a useful little thing, at least when you're debugging things, you're looking for problems, you want to see how things work, if you want to make sure that your IPv6 stuff works and so on. Of course, it requires that you actually use IPv6 on the client and the server, and you get a quad A address back from the name server. And I wanted to mention this isn't the bug of the week. Well, maybe it is. It was a bug. It was filed as a bug. But I think it was interesting that this was, maybe it was a little bit over a week. But since we're not doing weekly anyway, and who counts, right? The interesting bug of the week, or the performance boost of the week, was this: someone is using, I don't remember his name, that's why he's called someone right now, using curl for a browser, and he noticed that when he started his browser, libcurl started and he was reading cookies. I think it doesn't matter, when profiled, he noticed that the toUpper function in curl, let's dive into that too. We have our own toUpper function in curl, that changes a lowercase to a lowercase to an uppercase letter. Why do we have one of those? Ridiculous, right? Yeah, because it turns out that you can't do that. In the regular libc function for doing toUpper is locale dependent, so you can't do it without depending on the locale. And then there are silly locales that ruins it for us. So we have to have our own that makes toUpper unconditionally just ASCII based. But no, it's not ASCII based. It's actually from lower to upper. And it turns out that we support EBCDIC, which isn't ASCII. So we need, in the function, we do a switch. If it's lowercase a, return uppercase a, lowercase b, return uppercase b, lowercase c, return uppercase c, blah, 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 as 28 cases in a switch. And it turns out that that is really not very effective. In a modern GCC on a x86, he just modified that to a simple if it's a between a and z lowercase, then return the blah 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 as a sort of a conditional, and he improved the performance on that function alone by 40%, which I found interesting because I was so convinced that the GCC would have converted it to a lookup table and it would have been even faster, but no, this turned out to be a really good improvement. And of course I have to do it now conditionally. It's if-def, because if you're not using ASCII, we can't use that just calculating the uppercase from the lowercase, because in EBCDIC they don't have it in the same way. So it's if-def now, but it's much faster on all the ASCII platforms, and that's really the majority of all platforms that we build on. We actually only support one platform that is EBCDIC that I am aware of, which is some sort of mainframe TPF system. I don't know much about that, but I know that we support it. We have the code there, so that was fun. And then when I I sort of have I had a hard time to accept that fact that you could just improve the performance on that function by 40% with that little tiny thing. So I actually experimented with trying out a couple of alternations of that, like having a lookup table that I created, or changing that algorithm slightly to make it even faster. But the changes I could do in performance then was too small to actually motivate having it harder to read or bigger or anything. So I left it like that. Still a big performance boost. It turns out that it was also a problem for him, because the cookie implementation in curl is really not written to scale up really good to a lot of cookies. So if you're handling a lot of cookies, like in the thousands or so, curl is not very effectively handling those. It supports them, it works, but they turn slow because we're running through them and compares far too many instead of using hash lookup or whatever. So that's really another area for improvement, and we could really use that. We could really speed up the cookie handling probably enormously if we just fix that. But we haven't. But the to-upper function is faster. So that's it for this weekly. What are you up to? I didn't mention any Firefox work this time. I have a bunch of things to work on there. I have some I mentioned the network error logging, I think, last time, and I'm still on it. I haven't done much on it. I'm also working on network identification, and I'm working on a bunch of bugs like performance difference between Chrome and Firefox, claim to, at least between when playing YouTube, and I have another bug that says that Firefox can lock up when watching Facebook, so I can view a lot of YouTube and Facebook on work to make sure that I can repeat those problems, and I failed so far. And of course, they do. It's very platform specific, so one of them is on Windows and one of them is on Mac, blah blah blah. So yeah, I'm still on that race, and right. I also have another proxy-related thing for Firefox. Did I mention that? When I'm specifying when specifying a proxy in Firefox, you say, I want to connect to the network using this proxy or this pack, which is an URL when you get a JavaScript that tells you which proxy to use. It doesn't matter. It's basically the same concept here. When that proxy when it turns inaccessible or the pack URL doesn't work anymore. So like if you configure a proxy at work and you bring home the laptop and you open Firefox at home and the proxy isn't accessible anymore, it's at work and you're at home. So when Firefox can't find that proxy, it'll just sit there and try that proxy for a long time, and then it'll time out and you can get an error. And with my change that I landed a few weeks ago, Firefox will now try to connect directly. If the proxy fails and the pack fails, it'll try direct instead, which is what some other browsers do. And it's really handy for those that use the proxy at work and bring it home, and it'll just figure that out and work still. But of course, it turns out that people that are using proxies for privacy reasons or other reasons, and they're using tunnels or whatever, they're really concerned. They really don't want your browser to actually try without proxy, because the proxy is your way out and you don't want to reveal anything. You don't want that behavior. So I'm introducing a pref option to tell Firefox, no, never try to go outside of the proxy. And I'm about to land that patch really soon, today hopefully, so that you can actually tell Firefox to do it, to never try direct. It'll try direct by default, but you can alter that little option thing. There's no UI for that option now, or possibly ever, I don't know. I'm not in charge of the UI stuff, so I'm adding network code to handle this, and someone else will take care of the UI, if someone decides it's a good idea. I don't decide that. I'm happily, blissfully unaware of what users actually get to click on. But you can figure out the pref option, and I'll show you the name somewhere here when I add these annotations afterwards, because you're watching this video with annotations, right? I spend actually 20 minutes or so after each recording to add silly annotations on this video. Anyway, that's it for this week. I did cross the 20-minute line right now. Curb me if you can. Bye.